The wind came down off the Sangre de Cristos like it had a grudge to settle. Eli Crane stood at the edge of what the county deed called the Harlan property, 16 acres of sun-cracked hardpan, a listing barn that leaned westward like a man tired of standing. And a house that had gone grey the way old teeth go grey, slow and without apology. He'd paid $420 for it. Every cent he owned. He was 41 years old. His hands looked older than that. His eyes looked older still. He'd driven a single nail into the gatepost that morning, hung the deed from it with a rusted brad, and stood back to look at it the way a man looks at something he still isn't sure he believes. The paper fluttered in the dry air. The sun was the kind that didn't warm you, it only reminded you of your smallness, pressing down like a flat iron on the whole of the earth. That was when he heard the horse. Not the easy canter of a trail rider. This was hard riding, desperate riding, the kind that tears something loose in the chest of anyone who knows horses. He turned west down the county road and saw her coming, a woman astride a blood bay mare, riding low, holding something against her chest with one arm. Her hat was gone. Her dark hair was loose and wild with motion. Behind her, bouncing in the saddle with the grim concentration of children who'd learned too fast that falling had consequences, were two kids, a girl of perhaps 9 and a boy of 6, on a single broad-backed grey. The woman pulled up hard at his gate. The bay threw its head and danced. Her eyes went to him immediately, the way a cornered thing looks for exits and threats at the same time. She was breathing through her teeth. "This land belonged to you?" she asked. "Deed says so," Eli said. "Then we need to be on it," she said. "Right now. Please." He looked at her. Looked at the children, who looked back at him with wide, still eyes. Looked at the thing she clutched to her chest, a leather satchel, stamped with a silver monogram EVC. He stepped aside and opened the gate. "Come on, then," he said. If this story already has you feeling something, hit that subscribe button right now and ring that bell so you never miss what comes next. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now, settle in, because this one is going to stay with you. Her name was Violet Calloway. She told him this with the flat efficiency of someone who had learned that time spent explaining is time not spent surviving. Her father was Denton Calloway, owner of the Calloway Land and Cattle Company, whose operations covered better than 60,000 acres across 3 counties in southern Colorado. That name Eli knew. Most everyone in the territory knew it. The children were hers. The girl, Clara, had her mother's dark eyes and a careful, measuring way of looking at a room before she entered it. The boy, Silas, had a gap in his front teeth and clutched a small carved horse in his left fist the way other children clutch faith. Violet did not explain, that first hour, what she was running from. She didn't need to. The leather satchel she'd pressed against her chest turned out to hold 3 things, a folded land deed, a court document, and a pistol she laid on his kitchen table with the muzzle pointed away from everyone, the way a person does who was raised right but has lately been forced to learn otherwise. Eli looked at those items on the table and then looked at her. "You're welcome to stay," he said. "Long as you need." "You don't know who I am," she said. "You told me your name. You don't know what I've done." "Hasn't come up yet," he said. "You hungry?" She stared at him a moment. It was a stare that had several layers to it, suspicion on the top, exhaustion in the middle, and something fragile and raw at the bottom that she was working hard to keep covered. "Yes," she finally said. The house was a ruin, or near enough to one. The kitchen floor had 2 boards missing near the stove, replaced with a sheet of hammered tin that caught and threw light in odd ways. The window above the dry sink had a crack running diagonally across the lower pane, sealed with a strip of burlap and pine sap. The shelves held what Eli had brought 2 days prior when he'd first come to look the place over with ownership in his heart, a sack of dried pinto beans, a brick of lard wrapped in paper, cornmeal, salt, a small tin of baking powder, and 3 onions that had begun to feel philosophical about their condition. He did not apologize for any of it. He built the fire in the stove from kindling he'd split and stacked that morning, because the moment he'd seen the place he'd understood that the first act of any good homestead was heat. Clara watched him work the damper with the focused attention of a girl cataloguing emergency information. Silas sat at the table and moved the carved horse along the grain of the wood, making no sound. Violet stood at the cracked window and looked out at the yard. "The well working?" she asked. "Tested it this morning. Clean." She nodded and without a word picked up the bucket by the door and went out to it. When she came back she set the water on the stove and began washing her face and hands over the dry sink with the quiet thoroughness of a woman reclaiming something that had been taken from her. Eli soaked the beans, knowing they wouldn't soften properly in under an hour. Knowing the children were hungry now, so he sliced 3 of the onions thin and laid them in the cast iron skillet with lard that popped and hissed and filled the grey kitchen with a smell that was, Eli had long believed, one of God's small mercies. He mixed cornmeal with the baking powder and salt and enough water to make a thick batter, spooned rounds of it onto the second skillet, and covered them. Clara drifted into the kitchen on bare feet. "What is that smell?" she asked. "Onion," Eli said. "And corn cake. Can I help?" Eli looked at her. Looked at her small hands and the dark circles beneath her eyes that children shouldn't wear. "You know how to turn corn cake so it doesn't burn?" "Yes." "Then help," he said, and handed her the spatula. She took it with both hands and stood at the stove with her lower lip pressed inward in concentration, turning each round cake with a deliberateness that made Eli's chest ache in a way he didn't examine. When the food was done Eli set it on the table. He found 2 cups and filled them with water and set those out too, and pulled the single extra chair from the corner where it held a collapsed saddle blanket. They sat, all 4 of them, around the scarred table in the leaning house on the cracked hardpan at the edge of the world, and they ate. The corn cakes were thick and slightly scorched on one edge. The onions were sweet from the heat and the lard. There was no butter, no meat, no sweetness of any kind. Silas ate 3 corn cakes without speaking and drank his water and looked at his plate and looked at his mother and looked back at his plate. "Good," he said, finally. It was the first word he'd spoken since arriving. Violet lifted her eyes to Eli from across the table. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The way she looked at him was thanks enough, and also sorrow, and also a kind of warning to herself not to accept kindness too quickly, because quick kindness had burned her before. After supper, Eli moved the saddle blanket from the chair and spread it on the floor of the back room with the other blanket from his bedroll and told Violet and the children to take the back room. He'd sleep in the barn. "You don't have to do that," Violet said. "I know I don't," he said, and picked up his hat. 3 days passed the way mornings pass in dry country, slow in the going, fast in the reckoning. Eli rose before light and worked the fence line on the eastern quarter, resetting posts that had healed over in the hard earth, stretching wire that had gone slack and forgotten its purpose. He didn't ask Violet or the children for anything. He expected nothing. He worked the way he'd always worked, quietly, thoroughly, as though the fence itself was worth the respect of good labor. It was Silas who came to find him on the second morning. The boy appeared at the end of the fence line with both hands in his pockets and the carved horse tucked under one arm. Watching Eli work the post-hole digger into the resistant ground with the full and solemn weight of his 6 years of judgment. "That's hard," Silas said. "It is," Eli agreed. "Can I try?" Eli straightened and looked at the digger and looked at the boy. "You can hold the post steady while I drive it. That's the important part." Silas considered this. "Is it really the important part, or are you just saying so?" "Both," Eli said. The boy nodded, satisfied by honesty, and took hold of the post with both arms wrapped around it and his chin set with the absolute seriousness of someone who has decided that a job is worth doing correctly. Eli worked the digger. The post went in true. Clara found her way to the barn that same afternoon. She stood at the entrance watching Eli muck out the old stalls with a pitchfork, her arms folded, her dark eyes traveling every corner of the space. "This barn could be good," she said. "It could," Eli agreed. "The loft beam is cracked. I saw it. There's a family of barn swallows in the southeast corner. I know. Are you going to chase them out? No, Eli said. Swallows eat mosquitoes. They earn their keep. Clara unfolded her arms and came into the barn and picked up the second pitchfork leaning against the wall and began working the stall beside his without another word. She was thin, but she wasn't weak. She worked with economy, no wasted motion, no drama, and Eli thought that children who worked like that had learned it from watching a mother who had no margin for wasted motion either. On the afternoon of the third day, Violet came to where Eli was repairing the porch step. The third from the bottom had gone soft with rot and accepted his boot toe with a sickening give. She set a cup of coffee on the porch rail beside him. He hadn't had coffee in 4 days. He'd given her his last of it when she arrived and had said nothing about it. I found the tin, she said. I hope that's all right. That's what it's there for, he said. She sat on the top step and wrapped both hands around her own cup. The afternoon light came in at a low angle, the color of hammered brass, and it caught the lines around her eyes and the set of her jaw, which was a jaw accustomed to being set. His name is Franklin Dodd, she said. He works for my father. He's been working for my father for 9 years as a business agent, and for 6 of those years he was also working to get my father's land into his own name through a trust arrangement my father signed. 3 years ago when his mind started going soft. She paused. My father doesn't know his mind is going soft. That's the hardest part. Eli listened. He kept working the step, fitting the new board, but he listened to every word. The deed in the satchel is to this county. Land bordering yours to the north, a 40-acre parcel my mother left me separate from my father's holdings. Dodd doesn't know about it. My father's lawyer, a good man, kept it quiet from the trust documents. She looked at her coffee. I need time to get to a judge with the document showing what Dodd did. But Dodd knows I left with the children, and he knows I know what he did, and he will come. How long you need? Eli asked. 2 weeks. Maybe 3. He fitted the new board. He drove the nail. He tested the step with his boot. All right, he said. That's all, she said. Just all right. What else would you like me to say? She looked at him for a long moment. Most men would have questions, she said. I got questions, Eli said. I just figure you'll answer them when you're ready, and the ones you never answer are probably the ones that are yours to keep. He picked up his coffee and drank. It was strong and slightly burnt, and it was the best cup he'd tasted in months. Meanwhile, 40 miles south in the town of Creed, in a room above the Cattleman's Exchange Hotel, Franklin Dodd sat with his boots on a table and a glass of rye in his hand and a map of Hector County spread before him. He was a compact man with the kind of stillness that isn't peace but is its darker cousin. He had pale lashes and light eyes and a way of tilting his head when he was thinking that made him look like a man reading something written on the inside of his own skull. He knew Violet had land up here. He'd known for a year, had chosen to let it sit, small enough to ignore. He hadn't known she'd run to it. He found out on a Tuesday from a cattle buyer passing through who'd seen a woman matching her description, dark-haired, riding a blood bay, turning up the county road toward the old Harlan place. Dodd folded the map. He set down the rye. He called for his man, a wide-shouldered former sheriff's deputy named Corb, who stood in the doorway and filled most of it. We're going north, Dodd said. But not yet. Not until I know who she's with. On the 8th day, they went to town. Eli needed supplies, more cornmeal, a proper amount of coffee, a coil of wire, and 6 hinge pins for the barn door that he'd sourced wrong the first time. Violet needed to post a letter to her father's good lawyer, a man named Orrin Fells in Pueblo, with a specific set of instructions about timing and documentation and what to expect in the next 30 days. She wore a plain grey dress she'd found folded in the back room chest, left by the previous owners, who had apparently also run from something, and had brushed her hair back severely and pinned it. She looked like any woman in any hard-worn western town except for her hands, which were soft enough still to give her away as someone who'd recently come down considerably in her circumstances. The town of Morrow's Creek was 6 miles east on the county road. It was the kind of town that had survived by being useful and had confused usefulness with righteousness along the way. There was a mercantile, a post office operated from the back of the mercantile, a farrier, a 2-room schoolhouse closed for summer, a church that listed slightly on its foundation, and a saloon that did not list at all because it had been built by a better carpenter with a stronger motivation. Eli drove the wagon. Violet sat beside him on the bench. The children rode in the bed behind. Clara reading a small book she'd discovered among Eli's meager possessions, a battered copy of Tennyson's poems that he'd owned for 15 years and read perhaps 5 times and kept because the weight of it in his hand felt correct. Silas had his carved horse and was engaged in a private, silent drama with it against the side of the wagon. They were watched from the moment they entered the main street. Not with hostility, not at first. With the particular brand of small-town attention that is indistinguishable from surveillance. A woman sweeping a boardwalk did not sweep. A man tying a horse to a rail paused at the second loop and did not resume. 3 men outside the saloon stopped their conversation and tracked the wagon's passage with their eyes. Eli went to the mercantile. He gave his list to the proprietor, a lean, meticulous man named Garfield Pruitt, who had catalogued everything in his store, including its visitors, for 22 years. Pruitt took the list. He looked at Violet. He looked at the children. He looked at Eli. "You the one bought the Harlan place," he said. It was not a question. "I am," Eli said. "Heard you had company come in." "I do." Pruitt wrote the item slowly, as though buying time. "These folks staying long?" "Long as they need," Eli said. Pruitt set down his pencil with the careful deliberateness of a man setting down an argument. "Mr. Crane," he said. "I run a civil establishment and I don't involve myself in other men's business. But Morrow's Creek is a town with a certain," he searched for the word with visible effort, "character. People here are going to have questions about the arrangement." "The arrangement," Eli repeated. "A single man, a woman, 2 children. It's bound to be noticed. People will talk." "People always talk," Eli said. "You got my wire in back." A longer, more pointed silence entered from the street side, however, and it wore a black coat. Reverend Aldous Kane was a tall man with a face assembled from disapproval, long-nosed, heavy-browed, with a chin that led any room he entered. He had served the Morrow's Creek congregation for 11 years and considered himself the town's moral architecture, which was a role he took as structural rather than decorative. He came through the mercantile door with the gravity of a man whose entrances had rarely gone unremarked. "Mr. Crane," he said. "I was hoping to catch you in town." "Reverend," Eli said. Kane's eyes moved to Violet with the assessment of a man used to assessing. "And this would be the woman staying at your property?" "Mrs. Violet Calloway," Violet said, before Eli could speak. Her voice was steady as river stone. "I'm the daughter of Denton Calloway of the Calloway Land and Cattle Company. I'm on my own land, adjoining Mr. Crane's, while a legal matter is resolved in Pueblo. My children are Clara and Silas. Is there something I can help you with, Reverend?" Kane absorbed this. "I wasn't aware there was a second parcel up that road," he said. "Most people aren't," she said. "That's its charm." "Nevertheless," Kane said, pivoting slightly as men do when a frontal approach has been checked, "the children's welfare is my primary occupation," Violet said. "It always has been." "And the propriety of the living situation, Reverend." Eli's voice was quiet, but it had a quality to it, not threatening, but dense, the way bedrock is dense. The way you know before you test it that the thing will not give. The woman is a mother traveling through legal difficulty. She is on her own property and she eats a decent supper every evening and her children sleep in a clean room. What part of that would you like to bring before your congregation as a concern? The mercantile was very still. Pruitt had stopped any pretense of pulling supplies. Cain looked at Eli with the careful calculation of a man deciding whether to fight a particular current or swim around it. "I trust everything is above reproach," he said, finally. "It is," Eli said. "I appreciate your interest." Cain left. The door closed. Pruitt began pulling supplies. Outside, on the boardwalk, while Eli loaded the wagon, a woman named Hester Dean, whose husband ran the farrier shop and whose mouth ran considerably further than that, approached Violet with the particular smile of a person who has already decided what they think. "You're the Calloway girl," Hester said. "I heard your father's a very powerful man." "He is," Violet said. "Must be strange, then, ending up out here in this condition." Violet looked at her evenly. "What condition is that?" Hester's smile wavered. "I only meant, I know what you meant," Violet said. "Excuse me." She climbed onto the wagon bench herself and sat straight and still as a surveyor's rod until Eli came around and climbed up beside her with the last of the supplies. He looked at her face and understood what had happened without asking. He clicked to the horses and turned them for home, and the town watched them go. Clara, in the wagon bed, closed the Tennyson and looked at the retreating buildings of Morrow's Creek. "I don't like that town," she said. "You don't have to like it," Eli said. "You just have to be better than it." The letter to Orrin Fells had been posted. Violet calculated 10 days for a response, possibly less if Fells moved quickly. She was in communication with a judge in Pueblo she'd never met but whose reputation Fells had vouched for. The legal document in the satchel was specific and damning if it got to the right pair of eyes in time. She'd explained this to Eli in measured pieces. He'd listened in the same way he always listened, without flinching, without interrupting, and without softening the weight of it with false reassurances. He had also, that same evening, begun sleeping with his rifle beside him in the barn. It was on the 12th day that Corb came. Not Dodd himself, not yet. Dodd sent Corb the way a man throws a stone to test the ice, wanting to know what will hold and what will give. Corb arrived at the edge of the Harlan property after midnight, on foot, which told Eli that he'd left his horse a quarter-mile back on the road, a practiced choice. The choice of a man used to approach being more important than presence. Eli hadn't been asleep. He'd been listening, which was something he'd learned in the years between 20 and 30 that he never entirely unlearned. He listened to the silence the way a musician listens to the pause between notes, understanding that what fills a pause is often more important than the music on either side of it. He heard the silence change. He picked up the rifle and stepped out of the barn without light. The night was very clear. The stars were the kind of abundant that only shows itself in open country, far from town glow, and they cast enough light to see the shapes of things, fence posts, the water trough, the corner of the house, and the large, slow-moving shape of a man crossing the yard toward the porch. Eli did not call out. He moved along the fence line, staying low, staying with the shadow of the post run, until he was between the man and the porch door. Then he stepped into the man's path and stood still. Corb stopped. He was big enough that stopping required a moment of physical reckoning. He looked at Eli and at the rifle and recalculated something. "Evening," Corb said, as though this were not 12:30 in the morning and he were not in another man's yard uninvited. "Private property," Eli said. "Just passing through." "Nothing to pass through to," Eli said. "Roads that way." Corb shifted his weight. He had a gun on his hip. Eli saw the grip in the starlight, but his hand hadn't moved toward it, which meant he was still in the measuring phase. "I represent a business interest that has concerns about some property documents," Corb said. "Concerns about a woman who may have taken documents that belong to, she has no documents that belong to anyone but herself," Eli said. "And she's not here for your conversation tonight." "You sure about that?" Corb said. "Her father's company has considerable pull in this county. Could make things difficult for a man trying to establish a new property claim." The word difficult settled in the air between them. Eli looked at Corb. He looked at him for a long time without blinking or shifting. "I want you to hear me very clearly," Eli said. Not because I'm angry, because I'm not. But because I mean every word and I won't say them twice. He paused. This property is mine under deed and law. That woman and her children are guests on this land under my welcome. Any man who comes onto this property uninvited after dark is a trespasser, and this territory still has very clear opinions about what a man can do about trespassers on his own land at midnight. Do you follow me? Corb's jaw worked slightly. You're going to bring yourself a world of trouble, Corb said. That may be, Eli said. But it'll be my trouble, gotten honestly. Now I'm asking you once to walk back to your horse and go back south and tell whoever sent you that this road is closed. Corb looked at the rifle. He looked at the house. He looked at Eli. He turned and walked back the way he came. Eli stayed in the yard until he heard the distant sound of hooves moving south. Then he stood a while longer just to be sure. The night air was cold and dry and smelled of sage and the turned earth of the recently mended fence line. An owl called from the cartonwood at the north end of the property and was answered from somewhere further away. When Eli finally went back inside the barn, he sat on his bedroll with the rifle across his knees and did not sleep again until first light. In the morning he said nothing about it to Violet. She noticed the circles under his eyes at breakfast and looked at them and then looked at him. He held her gaze and shook his head once, barely, not yet, not in front of the children, and she understood and said nothing, and passed him his coffee. That evening, when the children had gone to the back room, he told her. She sat with her hands flat on the table and her face entirely still in the way of someone who has already imagined every version of this and is now simply watching one of them arrive. It was Dodd's man, she said. I expect so. She looked at the satchel on the shelf. Fells needs to move faster. Write him again, Eli said. I'll take it to town tomorrow morning early. She looked at him. There it was again, that stare with the layers. But the bottom layer, the raw and fragile one she'd been working to keep covered, was a little closer to the surface now. Not on display. Just closer. Why are you doing this? She asked. Not accusingly. Genuinely. Eli thought about it. He was not a man who gave unconsidered answers. Because it's right, he said. And because I've been nobody's reason for a long time. Feels worthwhile to be someone's reason now. She looked at the table. You should know, she said, that when this is over, when the legal matter is settled, I won't be a charity case. I have the 40 acres to the north. My mother's land. I intend to build something on it. I know, he said. I'm telling you so you don't mistake what this is, she said. My staying here. I'm not, she stopped. I haven't mistaken anything, Eli said. Go write your letter. Orrin Fells arrived on a Thursday morning, 17 days after the initial letter. In a hired buggy driven by a young man who looked like he'd been driving hard for 2 days and felt privately that the law was an unreasonable profession. Fells himself was 60, compact, white-haired at the temples, and possessed of the focused energy of a man who has spent a lifetime knowing exactly what piece of paper to put in front of which man at which moment. He shook Eli's hand, said nothing about the state of the house, accepted a cup of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with Violet and the satchel's contents arranged in front of him with the satisfaction of a surgeon recognizing a familiar anatomy. The trust document Dodd had your father sign, Fells said, was fraudulent in its execution. Dodd used a notary he controlled and excluded your father's primary counsel from the review, which violates the terms of your father's personal estate charter from 1887. He tapped the paper with one finger. This document, the original deed to your mother's land in Hector County, plus these 3 letters Dodd wrote to his personal bank in Santa Fe, constitute what I would call a very clean case. How long? Violet asked. The Pueblo judge has already been notified. Dodd is being served papers in Creed this morning, actually. Fells checked his pocket watch. I timed the arrival. There was a silence. Violet looked at her hands. My father, she said. What happens to him? Fells's voice went quieter. He's going to need looking after. The trust is voided, which means his original holdings revert fully to his estate and to you as primary heir. But Fells paused with the gentleness of a man choosing a word carefully. His clarity has diminished enough that managing the 60,000 acres will require a conservatorship. The court will likely appoint you. Can I do that from here? She asked. Fells looked at her. He looked at Eli. He looked at the house around them. Technically, he said, the law doesn't care where you live. But managing your father's holdings while establishing your own land here in Hector County would be, he chose the diplomatic word, ambitious. She can do it, Clara said from the doorway. Everyone looked at her. Clara stood with her arms folded and her dark eyes absolutely certain in the way of 9-year-old girls who have decided something is true and see no further argument as necessary. Fells almost smiled. I don't doubt it, he said. The legal proceedings moved swiftly in the way that things move when the documentation is clear and the judge is an honest man and the person who committed the fraud was not well loved in the first place. Dodd served his papers in Creed, reportedly stood very still for a long moment and then asked for whiskey, which was observed and later relayed through 3 separate channels until it reached Morrow's Creek by Saturday, traveling the way bad news travels in small territories, faster than horses. More thorough than weather. Eli drove Fells back to the county road on Friday afternoon and they stood a moment at the wagon before Fells climbed up. She's a formidable woman, Fells said. She is, Eli agreed. The children are well, Fells said. It was observation, not question. They're good children, Eli said. They've had good raising. Fells looked at him with the assessing eye of a man who has spent 60 years reading people in rooms where everyone is trying to manage what they reveal. Mr. Crane, he said carefully. The conservatorship for Denton Calloway's estate will be scrutinized. There will be parties who challenge it. A woman alone, with 2 children, managing 60,000 acres, the legal opposition will be creative and sustained. He paused. On the other hand, a woman whose own land and residence has a clear and established connection to a property owner of documented good standing in Hector County. He let this hang. Eli looked at him. That's an interesting thing to say, Eli said. It's a practical thing to say, Fells said. He climbed up. Think about it at whatever pace suits you. The court date is 6 weeks out. He drove away. Eli stood at the gate. That evening, he fixed the broken window latch in the back room. He'd noticed it the first week, the latch that wouldn't catch fully, that had to be pressed with a thumb to hold, and he'd been putting it off for reasons he hadn't examined closely. He found a piece of scrap iron in the barn and shaped it at the small forge and fitted it to the window frame with 3 new screws, tested it 4 times, and found it true. Violet heard the sound and came to the doorway of the back room and watched him work. You didn't have to do that, she said. Window latch that doesn't catch is a safety concern, he said. Is that the only reason? He tested the latch 1 more time. Set it. Step back. No, he said. She was quiet for a moment. Fells said something to you, she said. Not a question. He did. What did he say? Eli turned from the window and looked at her directly. He was not a man who dressed things in language they didn't deserve. He said that your legal position, the conservatorship, the challenge, would be stronger if your residence here had a clearer legal standing. That you weren't just a guest on another man's property but had a formal connection to it. Violet looked at him for a long time. And what did you say? She asked. I said it was an interesting thing to say. And what do you think? He looked at his hands. He looked at the window with its new latch. I think, he said slowly, that a man with 16 acres and $420 to his name is maybe not what most people would call a prospect. I think you have 40 acres to the north and 60,000 acres of your father's estate and a life that's considerably larger than anything I could offer. He paused. I also think that the 6 weeks between now and that court date would be enough time for a county judge to make a record of a marriage in Hector County that would close off a good number of the legal Arguments your opponents are preparing. Violet folded her arms. Her jaw was set the way it always was when she was doing rapid internal accounting. That's a very practical proposal, she said. I'm a practical man. It's also, she stopped. It's also what? He asked. She unfolded her arms. It's also not entirely unwelcome, she said. From a non-practical standpoint. No, he said. No, she said. And the bottom layer, the raw and fragile one she'd been keeping covered, was fully at the surface now. Not broken, not desperate, but there. Present. Real. Then I'll go see the county judge Monday, he said. All right, she said. All right, he said. The window latch held all night. The news reached Morrow's Creek in the way that good news reaches a small town, slower than bad news, and with more initial skepticism. But it arrived nonetheless, carried first by Orrin Fells's driver, who stopped for a meal at the saloon and talked more than he should have, and then confirmed by the county records clerk. Who mentioned it to Garfield Pruitt, who mentioned it to 3 people before lunch and 4 more by supper. Violet Crane, formerly Calloway, owned 40 acres in Hector County and was the appointed conservator of 60,000 acres of the Calloway Land and Cattle Company. Her husband owned the adjacent 16 acres. The Dodd matter had been resolved by the Pueblo court in a single hearing. The fraud being what Fells called subsequently almost impressively obvious. Franklin Dodd had relocated to New Mexico Territory by the following week. The speed of his departure suggesting he'd already been planning for this possibility. Reverend Kane called on the Cranes on a Wednesday afternoon with a jar of his wife's preserved plums and a manner that had been considerably revised since his conversation in the Mercantile. He was gracious. He was warm. He was so thoroughly recontextualized by circumstance that Violet received him with the calibrated politeness of a woman who forgets nothing but has chosen, this particular afternoon, to model a behavior she wanted her children to observe. Hester Dean, the farrier's wife, sent a loaf of bread. Pruitt gave Eli a hardware discount he'd never offered before, which Eli accepted without remark or satisfaction. The town of Morrow's Creek did not change its essential nature in any permanent way. Small towns rarely do. But it adjusted, the way weather vanes adjust, following whatever wind was currently strongest, and for the Cranes, that adjustment was sufficient. Silas started at the schoolhouse when it opened in September. He brought his carved horse the first day and left it in his jacket pocket, which was a compromise between the boy he'd been and the boy he was choosing to become. He came home with a split lip from a disagreement with another boy on the 3rd day and told Eli about it with complete factual accuracy and no apparent request for sympathy. Eli listened. He said, "Did you win?" "No," Silas said. "But I didn't lose either." "That's usually the best you can hope for," Eli said. Clara read all the Tennyson. She asked Eli for other books. He went to Pruitt's and found 2 history, 1 geography, and a collection of Shakespeare's histories that he thought might be beyond her and which she consumed in 11 days and then talked about at dinner with the unsettling depth of a person who had found a mirror in language that showed them something they recognized. Violet rode the 40 acres north on a clear October morning with a surveyor she'd contracted from Pueblo. She came back that evening with rolled papers under one arm and her eyes full of plans that were more blueprint than dream, specific, dimensional, achievable. She spread them on the kitchen table after supper and she and Eli bent over them together in the lamplight. And her finger traced the line of the north fence and the placement of a proper barn and the rise of ground that would shelter a house from the north wind. It was not the first time their heads had been close in the lamplight, but it was the first time neither of them moved away. There is a particular kind of ruin that looks, from the outside, like an ending. A leaning barn. A cracked window. A hard-pan yard baked to the color of disappointment. A man standing at a gate holding a deed he's not sure he believes in yet. A woman riding hard with her children and everything that matters pressed against her chest. From a distance, these things look like the end of a story. But land is patient in ways that people are still learning to be. It receives whatever is planted in it, despair, labor, silence, care, and it does not judge the planting. It only responds to the tending. What grew on those 16 acres, and the 40 to the north, and in the rearranged geometry of a family made from wreckage and honesty, was not perfect. It was not without difficulty or setback or the ongoing management of loss. Clara carried her wariness for years like a smooth stone in her pocket, taking it out to examine it sometimes and putting it back. Silas grew up with the carved horse on his windowsill long past the age when most boys would have set it aside. Because some things that keep you steady in your worst season deserve to stay in your best ones too. Violet learned, slowly, that accepting care is not the same as becoming dependent. That allowing someone to stand beside you in the dark is not weakness but is, in fact, the bravest thing, because it requires you to believe, against every lesson the world has sent you, that the person beside you intends to stay. Eli learned that a reason for being is worth more than acres or dollars or the approval of any town. The latch on the back window held for 37 years. Broken places, tended honestly, grow back stronger than the ground around them. That is not sentiment. That is simply what land does. That is simply what people do when they are given a gate, left open, and told in plain language, "Come on, then."